The Bell P-39 Airacobra was one of the principal American fighter aircraft in service when the United States entered World War II. The P-39 was used by the Soviet Air Force, and scored the highest number of individual kills attributed to any U.S. fighter type in the Eastern European theater. Other major users of the type included the Free French, the Royal Air Force, the United States Army Air Forces, and the Italian Co-Belligerent Air Force. Designed by Bell Aircraft, it had an innovative layout, with the engine installed in the center fuselage, behind the pilot, and driving a tractor propeller via a long shaft. It was also the first fighter fitted with a tricycle undercarriage. Although its mid-engine placement was innovative, the P-39 design was handicapped by the absence of an efficient turbo-supercharger, preventing it from performing high-altitude work. As such, it was rejected by the RAF for use over Western Europe but adopted by the USSR, where most air combat took place at medium and lower altitudes. Together with the derivative P-63 King Cobra, the P-39 was one of the most successful fixed-wing aircraft manufactured by Bell. Design and development. Circular Proposal X609. In February 1937, Lieutenant Benjamin S. Kelsey, project officer for fighters at the United States Army Air Corps, USAC, and Captain Gordon P. Suville, fighter tactics instructor at the Air Corps Tactical School, issued a specification for a new fighter via Circular Proposal X609. It was a request for a single-engine high-altitude interceptor having the tactical mission of interception and attack of hostile aircraft at high altitude. Despite being called an interceptor, the proposed aircraft's role was simply an extension of the traditional pursuit, fighter, role, using a heavier and more powerful aircraft at higher altitude. Specifications called for at least 1,000 pounds of heavy armament, including a cannon, a liquid-cooled Allison engine with a General Electric turbo-supercharger, tricycle landing gear, a level airspeed of at least 360 miles per hour, 580 kilometers per hour, at altitude, and a climb to 20,000 feet, 6,100 m, within 6 minutes. This was the most demanding set of fighter specifications USAC had presented to that date. Although Bell's limited fighter design work had previously resulted in the unusual Bell YFM-1 Airacobra, the Model 12 proposal adopted an equally original configuration with an Allison V12 engine mounted in the middle of the fuselage, just behind the cockpit, and a propeller driven by a shaft passing beneath the pilot's feet under the cockpit floor. The main purpose of this configuration was to free up space for the heavy main armament, a 37 mm, 1.46 in, Oldsmobile T9 cannon firing through the center of the propeller hub for optimum accuracy and stability when firing. This happened because H.M. Poyler, designer for project leader Robert Woods, was impressed by the power of this weapon and pressed for its incorporation. This was unusual, because fighter design had previously been driven by the intended engine, not the weapon system. Although devastating when it worked, the T9 had very limited ammunition, a low rate of fire, and was prone to jamming. A secondary benefit of the mid-engine arrangement was that it created a smooth and streamlined nose profile. Much was made of the fact that this resulted in a configuration with as trim and clean a fuselage nose as the snout of a high-velocity bullet. Entry to the cockpit was through side doors, mounted on both sides of the cockpit, rather than a sliding canopy. Its unusual engine location and the long drive shaft caused some concern to pilots at first, but experience showed this was no more of a hazard in a crash landing than with an engine located forward of the cockpit. There were no problems with propeller shaft failure. XP-39 developments. The XP-39 made its maiden flight on April 6, 1938. At Wright Field, Ohio, achieving 390 miles per hour, 630 kilometers per hour, at 20,000 feet, 6,100 m, reaching this altitude in only 5 minutes. However, the XP-39 was found to be short on performance at altitude. Flight testing had found its top speed at 20,000 feet to be lower than the 400 miles per hour claimed in the original proposal. As originally specified by Kelsey and Suville, the XP-39 had a turbo supercharger to augment its high-altitude performance. Bell cooled the turbo with a scoop on the left side of the fuselage. Kelsey wished to shepherd the XP-39 through its early engineering teething troubles, but he was ordered to England. The XP-39 project was handed over to others, and in June 1939 the prototype was ordered by General Henry H. Arnold to be evaluated in NACA wind tunnels to find ways of increasing its speed, by reducing parasitic drag. Tests were carried out, and Bell engineers followed the recommendations of NACA and the Army to reduce drag such that the top speed was increased 16%. NACA wrote, "It is imperative to enclose the supercharger within the airplane with an efficient duct system for cooling the rotor and discharging the cooling air and exhaust gases." In the very tightly planned XP-39, though, there was no internal space left over for the turbo. Using a drag build-up scheme, a number of potential areas of drag reduction were found. NACA concluded that a top speed of 429 miles per hour could be realized with the aerodynamic improvements they had developed and an uprated V1710 with only a single-stage, single-speed supercharger. At a pivotal meeting with the USAC and NACA in August 1939, Larry Bell proposed that the production P-39 aircraft be configured without the turbocharger. Some historians have questioned Bell's true motivation in reconfiguring the aircraft. The strongest hypothesis is that Bell's factory didn't have an active production program and he was desperate for cash flow. Other historians mention that wind tunnel tests made the designers believe the turbocharger installation was so aerodynamically cluttered that it had more disadvantages than advantages. The Army ordered 12 YP-39s, with only a single-stage, single-speed supercharger, for service evaluation and one YP-39A. After these trials were complete, which resulted in detail changes including deletion of the external radiator, and on advice from NACA, the prototype was modified as the XP-39B. After demonstrating a performance improvement, the 13 YP-39s were completed to the standard, adding two 0.30 in, 7.62 mm, machine guns to the two existing 0.50 in, 12.7 mm, guns. Lacking armor or self-sealing fuel tanks, the prototype was 1 ton, 900 kilograms, lighter than the production fighters. The production P-39 retained a single-stage, single-speed supercharger with a critical altitude, above which performance declined, of about 12,000 feet, 3,660 m. As a result, the aircraft was simpler to produce and maintain. However, the deletion of the turbo destroyed any chance that the P-39 could serve as a medium-high altitude front-line fighter. When deficiencies were noticed in 1940 and 1941, the lack of a turbo made it nearly impossible to improve upon the Airacobra's performance. The removal of the turbocharger and its drag-inducing inlet cured the drag problem but reduced performance overall. In later years, Kelsey expressed regret at not being present to override the decision to eliminate the turbo. After completing service trials, and originally designated P-45, a first order for 80 aircraft was placed August 10, 1939, the designation reverted to P-39C before deliveries began. After assessing aerial combat conditions in Europe, it was evident that without armor or self-sealing tanks, the 20 production P-39Cs were not suitable for operational use. The remaining 60 machines in the order were built as P-39Ds with armor, self-sealing tanks, and enhanced armament. These P-39Ds were the first Airacobras to enter into service with the Army Air Corps units and would be the first ones to see action. Technical details. The P-39 was an all-metal, low-wing, single-engine fighter, with a tricycle undercarriage and an Allison V1710 liquid-cooled V12 engine mounted in the central fuselage, directly behind the cockpit. The Airacobra was one of the first production fighters to be conceived as a weapons system. In this case the aircraft, known originally as the Bell Model 4, was designed to provide a platform for the 37mm T9 cannon. This weapon, which was designed in 1934 by the American Armament Corporation, a division of Oldsmobile, fired a 1.3 pounds, 610 g, projectile capable of piercing 0.8 in, 2 centimeters, of armor at 500 yd, 450 m, with armor-piercing rounds. The 90 in, 230 centimeters, long, 200 pounds, 91 kilograms, weapon had to be rigidly mounted and fire parallel to and close to the center line of the new fighter. It would have been impossible to mount the weapon in the fuselage, firing through the cylinder banks of the V-configured engine and the propeller hub as could be done with smaller 20 mm cannon. Weight, balance, and visibility considerations meant that the cockpit could not be placed farther back in the fuselage, behind the engine and cannon. The solution adopted was to mount the cannon in the forward fuselage and the engine in the center fuselage, directly behind the pilot's seat. The tractor propeller was driven via a 10-foot-long, 3.0 m, drive shaft made in 2 sections, incorporating a self-aligning bearing to accommodate fuselage deflection during violent maneuvers. This shaft ran through a tunnel in the cockpit floor and was connected to a gearbox in the nose of the fuselage which, in turn, drove the 3 or, later, 4-blade propeller via a short central shaft. The gearbox was provided with its own lubrication system, separate from the engine. In later versions of the Airacobra the gearbox was provided with some armor protection. The glycol-cooled radiator was fitted in the wing center section, immediately beneath the engine. This was flanked on either side by a single drum-shaped oil cooler. Air for the radiator and oil coolers was drawn in through intakes in both wing root leading edges and was directed via 4 ducts to the radiator faces. The air was then exhausted through 3 controllable hinged flaps near the trailing edge of the center section. Air for the carburetor was drawn in via a raised oval intake immediately aft of the rear canopy. The fuselage structure was unusual and innovative, being based on a strong central keel that incorporated the armament, cockpit, and engine. 2 strong fuselage beams to port and starboard formed the basis of the structure. These angled upwards fore and aft to create mounting points for the T9 cannon and propeller reduction gearbox and for the engine and accessories respectively. A strong arched bulkhead provided the main structural attachment point for the main spar of the wing. This arch incorporated a fireproof panel and an armor plate between the engine and the cockpit. It also incorporated a turnover pylon and a pane of bullet-resistant glass behind the pilot's head. The arch also formed the basis of the cockpit housing. The pilot's seat was attached to the forward face as was the cockpit floor. Forward of the cockpit the fuselage nose was formed from large removable covers. A long nose wheel well was incorporated in the lower nose section. The engine and accessories were attached to the rear of the arch and the main structural beams. These too were covered using large removable panels. A conventional semi-monocoque rear fuselage was attached aft of the main structure. Because the pilot was above the extension shaft, he was placed higher in the fuselage than in most contemporary fighters, which, in turn gave the pilot a good field of view. Access to the cockpit was via sideways opening car doors, one on either side. Both had wind-down windows. As only the right-hand door had a handle both inside and outside, this was used as the normal means of access and egress. The left-hand door could be opened only from the outside and was for emergency use, although both doors could be jettisoned. In operational use, as the roof was fixed, the cockpit design made escape difficult in an emergency. The complete armament fit consisted of the T9 cannon with a pair of Browning M2.50 caliber, 12.7 mm, machine guns mounted in the nose. This changed to 2.50 in, 12.7 mm, and 2.30 in, 7.62 mm, guns in the XP-39B, P-39C, Model 13, the first 20 delivered, and 20.50 in /12.7 mm and 40.30 in /7.62 mm, all 4 in the wings, in the P-39D, Model 15, which also introduced self-sealing tanks and shackles, and piping, for a 500 pounds, 227 kilograms, bomb or drop tank. Because of the unconventional layout, there was no space in the fuselage to place a fuel tank. Although drop tanks were implemented to extend its range, the standard fuel load was carried in the wings, with the result that the P-39 was limited to short-range tactical strikes. A heavy structure, and around 265 pounds, 120 kilograms, of armor were characteristic of this aircraft as well. The production P-39's heavier weight combined with the Allison engine with only a single-speed supercharger, limited the high-altitude capabilities of the fighter. The P-39's altitude performance was markedly inferior to the contemporary European fighters and, as a result, the first USAF fighter units in the European theater were equipped with the Spitfire V. However, the P-39D's roll rate was 75 degrees/s at 235 miles per hour, 378 kilometers per hour, better than the A6M2, F4F, F6F, or P-38 up to 265 miles per hour, 426 kilometers per hour, CNACA chart. Above the supercharger's critical altitude of about 12,000 feet, 3,658 m, an early P-39's performance dropped off rapidly. This limited its usefulness in traditional fighter missions in Europe as well as in the Pacific, where it was not uncommon for Japanese bombers to attack at altitudes above the P-39's operational ceiling, which in the tropical hot air was lower than in moderate climates. The late production N and Q models, 75% of all Airacobras, could maintain a top speed of approximately 375 miles per hour, 604 kilometers per hour, up to 20,000 feet, 6,100 m. The weight distribution of the P-39 was supposedly the reason for its tendency to enter a dangerous flat spin, a characteristic Soviet test pilots were able to demonstrate to the skeptical manufacturer who had been unable to reproduce the effect. After extensive tests, it was determined the spin could only be induced if the aircraft was improperly loaded, with no ammunition in the front compartment. The flight manual noted a need to ballast the front ammunition compartment with the appropriate weight of shell casings to achieve a reasonable center of gravity. High-speed controls were light, consequently high-speed turns and pullouts were possible. The P-39 had to be held in a dive since it tended to level out, reminiscent of the Spitfire. The recommended never-exceed dive speed limit, VEAN, was 475 miles per hour, 764 kilometers per hour, for the P-39. Soon after entering service, pilots began to report that during flights of the P-39 in certain maneuvers, it tumbled end over end. Most of these events happened after the aircraft was stalled in a nose-high attitude with considerable power applied. Concerned, Bell initiated a test program. Bell pilots made 86 separate efforts to reproduce the reported tumbling characteristics. In no case were they able to tumble the aircraft. In his autobiography Veteran Test and Air Show pilot R.A. Bob Hoover provides an account of tumbling a P-39. He goes on to say that in hindsight, he was actually performing a Lomkovac, a now common air show maneuver, which he was also able to do in a Curtiss P-40. An informal study of the P-39's spinning characteristics was conducted in the NASA Langley Research Center 20-foot free spinning tunnel during the 1970s. A study of old reports showed that during earlier spin testing in the facility, the aircraft had never tumbled. However, it was noted that all testing had been done with a simulated full ammunition load, which drew the aircraft's center of gravity forward. After finding the original spin test model of the P-39 in storage, the new study first replicated the earlier testing, with consistent results. Then, the model was reballasted to simulate a condition of no ammunition load, which moved the aircraft's center of gravity aft. Under these conditions, the model was found to often tumble when thrown into the tunnel. The rear-mounted engine made the aircraft ideal for ground attack since fire would be coming from the front bottom quarter and was less likely to hit the engine and its cooling systems. The arrangement proved to be very vulnerable to attacks from above and behind, and nearly any hit on the fuselage from an attacking enemy fighter was virtually guaranteed to disable the cooling system and lead to the prompt demise of the engine and thus the aircraft. Flying at its upper altitude limits, the Airacobra was extremely vulnerable to any enemy fighter with decent high-altitude performance. Service and versions. In September 1940, Britain ordered 386 P-39DS, Model 14, with a 20 mm, .79 in, Hispano-Suez HS.404 and 6.303 in, 7.7 mm, instead of a 37 mm, 1.46 in, cannon and 60.30 in, 7.62 mm, guns. The RAF eventually ordered a total of 675 P-39s. However, after the first Airacobras arrived at 601 Squadron RAF in September 1941, they were promptly recognized as having an inadequate rate of climb and performance at altitude for Western European conditions. Only 80 were adopted, all of them with 601 Squadron. Britain transferred about 200 P-39s to the Soviet Union. Another 200 examples intended for the RAF were taken up by the USAF after the attack on Pearl Harbor as the P-400, and were sent to the 5th Air Force in Australia, for service in the Southwest Pacific Theater. By the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, nearly 600 P-39s had been built. When P-39 production ended in August 1944, Bell had built 9,558 Airacobras, of which 4,773, mostly 39N and 39Q, were sent to the Soviet Union through the Lend-Lease program. There were numerous minor variations in engine, propeller, and armament, but no major structural changes in production types, excepting a few 2-seat TP-39F and RP-39Q trainers. In addition, 7 went to the U.S. Navy as radio-controlled drones. Trials of a laminar flow wing, in the XP-39E, and Continental 4-1430 engine, the P-76, were unsuccessful. The mid-engine, gun-through hub concept was developed further in the Bell P-63 King Cobra. A naval version with tailwheel landing gear, the XFL-1 Aerobonita, was ordered as a competitor to the Vought F-4U Corsair and Grumman XF-5F Skyrocket. It first flew May 13, 1940, but after a troublesome and protracted development and testing period, it was rejected. Operational history. The Airacobras saw combat throughout the world, particularly in the Southwest Pacific, Mediterranean and Soviet theaters. Because its engine was equipped with only a single-stage, single-speed supercharger, the P-39 performed poorly above 17,000 feet, 5,200 m, altitude. In both Western Europe and the Pacific, the Airacobra found itself outclassed as an interceptor and the type was gradually relegated to other duties. It often was used at lower altitudes for such missions as ground strafing. United Kingdom. In 1940, the British Direct Purchase Commission in the US was looking for combat aircraft. They ordered 675 of the export version Bell Model 14 as the Caribou on the strength of the company's representations on April 13, 1940. The British armament was 2 nose-mounted 0.50 in, 12.7 mm, machine guns, and 4 0.303 in, 7.7 mm, Browning machine guns in the wings. The 37 mm gun was replaced by a 20 mm, .79 in, Hispano-Suez cannon. British expectations had been set by performance figures established by the unarmed and unarmored XP-39 prototype. The British production contract stated that a maximum speed of 394 miles per hour, 634 kilometers per hour, +/4% was required at rated altitude. In acceptance testing, actual production aircraft were found to be capable of only 371 miles per hour at 14,090 feet. To enable the aircraft to make the guarantee speed, a variety of drag reduction modifications were developed by Bell. The areas of the elevator and rudder were reduced by 14.2% and 25.2% respectively. Modified fillets were installed in the tail area. The canopy glass was faired to its frame with putty. The gun access doors on the wing had been seen to bulge in flight, so they were replaced with thicker aluminum sheet. Similarly, the landing gear doors deflected open by as much as 2 inches at maximum speed, so a stronger linkage was installed to hold them flush. The cooling air exit from the oil and coolant radiators was reduced in area to match the exit velocity to the local flow. New engine exhaust stacks, deflected to match the local flow and with nozzles to increase thrust augmentation, were installed. The machine gun ports were faired over, the antenna mast was removed, a single-piece engine cowling was installed and an exhaust stack fairing was added. The airframe was painted with 20 coats of primer, with extensive sanding between coats. Standard camouflage was applied and sanded to remove the edges between the colors. Additionally, about 200 pounds, 91 kilograms, of weight was removed, making it lighter than normal, 7,466 pounds gross. After these modifications, the second production aircraft, serial A571, reached a speed of 391 miles per hour, 629 kilometers per hour, at 14,400 feet, 4,400 m, in flight test. As this speed was within 1% of the guarantee, the aircraft was declared to have satisfied contractual obligations. Despite the success of these modifications, none were applied to other production P-39s. Later testing of a standard production P-400 by the British Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment, ANAE, revealed a top speed of only 359 miles per hour, 578 kilometers per hour. The British export models were renamed Airacobra in 1941. A further 150 were specified for delivery under Lend-Lease in 1941, but these were not supplied. The Royal Air Force, RAF, took delivery in mid-1941 and found that performance of the non-turbo supercharged production aircraft differed markedly from what they were expecting. In some areas, the Airacobra was inferior to existing aircraft such as the Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire, and its performance at altitude suffered drastically. Tests by the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Boscombe Bay Down showed the Airacobra reached 355 miles per hour, 571 kilometers per hour, at 13,000 feet, 3,962 m. The cockpit layout was criticized, and it was noted that the pilot would have difficulty in bailing out in an emergency because the cockpit roof could not be jettisoned. The lack of a clear vision panel on the windscreen assembly meant that in the event of heavy rain the pilot's forward view would be completely obliterated. The pilot's notes advised that in this case the door windows would have to be lowered and the speed reduced to 150 miles per hour, 241 kilometers per hour. On the other hand, it was considered effective for low-level fighter and ground attack work. Problems with gun and exhaust flash suppression and the compass could be fixed. Number 601 Squadron RAF was the only British unit to use the Airacobra operationally, receiving their first 2 examples on August 6, 1941. On October 9, 4 Airacobras attacked enemy barges near Dunkirk, in the type's only operational action with the RAF. The squadron continued to train with the Airacobra during the winter, but a combination of poor serviceability and deep distrust of this unfamiliar fighter resulted in the RAF rejecting the type after 1 combat mission. In March 1942, the unit re-equipped with Spitfires. The Airacobras already in the UK, along with the remainder of the first batch being built in the US, were sent to the Soviet Air Force, the sole exception being A574, which was passed to the Royal Navy and used for experimental work, including the first carrier landing by a tricycle undercarriage aircraft on April 4, 1945 on HMS Pretoria Castle, until it was scrapped on the recommendation of a visiting Bell test pilot in March 1946. U.S. Army Air Forces. Pacific. The United States requisitioned 200 of the aircraft being manufactured for the UK, adopting them as P-400s, named for the advertised top speed of 400 miles per hour, 644 kilometers per hour. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the P-400 was deployed to training units, but some saw combat in the Southwest Pacific, including with the Cactus Air Force in the Battle of Guadalcanal. Though outclassed by Japanese fighter aircraft, it performed well in strafing and bombing runs, often proving deadly in ground attacks on Japanese forces trying to retake Henderson Field. Guns salvaged from P-39s were sometimes fitted to Navy PT boats to increase firepower. Pacific pilots often complained about problems of performance and unreliable armament, but by the end of 1942, the P-39 units of the 5th Air Force had claimed about 80 Japanese aircraft, with a similar number of P-39s lost. By any standard, the Airacobras and their pilots held their ground against the Japanese. 5th and 13th Air Force P-39s did not score more aerial victories in the Solomons due to the aircraft's limited range and poor high-altitude performance. Airacobras first fought Japanese Zeros on April 30, 1942 in a low-level action near La, New Guinea. From May to August 1942, combat between Airacobras and Zeros took place on a regular basis over New Guinea. Compilation of combat reports indicates the Zero was either equal to or close to the P-39 in speed at the altitudes of the various low-level encounters. From September to November 1942, pilots of the 57th Fighter Squadron flew P-39s and P-38s from an airfield built on land bulldozed into Colic Bay on the barren island of Adak in Alaska's Aleutian Islands. They attacked the Japanese forces that had invaded Attu and Kiska Islands in the Aleutians in June 1942. The factor that claimed the most lives was not the Japanese but the weather. The low clouds, heavy mist and fog, driving rain, snow, and high winds made flying dangerous and lives miserable. The 57th remained in Alaska until November 1942, then returned to the United States. Lieutenant Bill Fiedler became an ace in AP-39, while many later U.S. aces scored one or two of their victories in the type. The Airacobra's low-altitude performance was good and its firepower was impressive, and with air battles in the Pacific fought at intermediate altitudes, the P-39 did well against light and agile Japanese A-6MS and Ki-43s, considering American numerical inferiority and Japanese veteran pilots. It soon became the joke in the Pacific theater that a P-400 was a P-40 with a zero on its tail. Mediterranean. In North Africa, the 99th Fighter Squadron, also known as the Tuskegee Airmen, transitioned quickly from the P-40 and were assigned P-39s in February 1944, but only flew the type for a few weeks. The 99th carried out their duties including supporting Operation Shingle over Anzio as well as missions over the Gulf of Naples in the Airacobra but achieved few aerial victories. The major MTO P-39 operators included the 81st and 350th Fighter Groups, both flying the Maritime Patrol mission from North Africa and on through Italy. The 81st transferred to the China-Burma-India theater by March 1944 and the 350th began transition to the P-47D in August 1944, remaining in Italy with the 12th Air Force. Soviet Union. The most successful and numerous use of the P-39 was by the Red Air Force, Vojenno-Vozdushny Sily, VVS. They received the considerably improved N and Q models via the Alaska-Siberia ferry route. The tactical environment of the Eastern Front did not demand the high-altitude performance the RAF and AAF did. The comparatively low speed, low-altitude nature of most air combat on the Soviet front suited the P-39's strengths, sturdy construction, reliable radio gear, and adequate firepower. Soviet pilots appreciated the cannon-armed P-39 primarily for its air-to-air capability. A common Western misconception is that the Bell fighters were used as ground attack aircraft. This is because the Soviet term for the mission of the P-39, Prikrytyi Sukhoputnik Voisk, coverage of ground forces, is commonly translated ground support, which is often taken to mean close air support. In Soviet usage, it has a broader meaning. Soviet-operated P-39s did make strafing attacks, but it was never a primary mission or strong suit for this aircraft. The Soviets developed successful group aerial fighting tactics for the Bell fighters and scored a surprising number of aerial victories over a variety of German aircraft. Soviet P-39s had no trouble dispatching Junkers Ju-87 Stukas or German twin-engine bombers and matched, and in some areas surpassed, early and mid-war Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The usual nickname for the Airacobra in the VVS was Kobrushka, Little Cobra, or Kobrastaka, a blend of cobra and lastica, swallow, dear little cobra. I liked the Cobra, especially the Q5 version. It was the lightest version of all Cobras and was the best fighter I ever flew. The cockpit was very comfortable, and visibility was outstanding. The instrument panel was very ergonomic, with the entire complement of instruments right up to an artificial horizon and radio compass. It even had a relief tube in the shape of a funnel. The armored glass was very strong, extremely thick. The armor on the back was also thick. The oxygen equipment was reliable, although the mask was quite small, only covering the nose and mouth. We wore that mask only at high altitude. The HF radio set was powerful, reliable, and clear. Soviet pilot Nikolai G. Golodnikov, recalling his experiences of the P-39. The first Soviet Cobras had a 20mm Hispano-Suiza cannon and 2 heavy Browning machine guns, synchronized and mounted in the nose. Later, Cobras arrived with the M4 37mm cannon and 4 machine guns, 2 synchronized and 2 wing-mounted. We immediate.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.